The rain hammered against the windows of my Portland apartment, a steady drumming that felt older than the clouds themselves drifting over the bay. I sat on the couch with my laptop open, staring at a sentence I couldn't finish, the cursor blinking like a patient metronome. My phone rang once, a sharp, sudden sound in the quiet, announcing a new voicemail. I didn't hesitate. I pressed play, expecting a client note or a reminder I'd left for myself. Instead, Damien's voice filled the room. "Mom, I've been thinking about what we talked about. Elise is just unreliable. She's unstable, careless. If we want to be sure the house and the bills are safe, you need to transfer everything to me. I can handle it. She doesn't have the right state of mind for it." The words landed like open palms. Each one tightened the knot already forming in my stomach. 27 seconds. That's all it took for decades of careful peacekeeping to crumble. I sat motionless, watching my reflection in the dark window, pale, unfamiliar, a stranger in my own skin. He hadn't meant for me to hear this. He thought he was whispering safely in our mother's ear, shaping her opinion of me one more time. This wasn't simple sibling rivalry, the usual friction of pride and blame. This was a plan. Calculated. Precise. Designed to write me out of my own family story. The message ended with a hollow click, leaving me alone with a truth I couldn't unhear. I saved the file, placed the phone on the table beside me, and leaned back into the couch. I already knew I wouldn't wake up the same person tomorrow. By morning, the storm outside had softened to a drizzle, but inside my chest, the weight of Damien's voicemail pressed heavier than any cloud. It pulled me backward through the years that had quietly groomed me for this moment. Brunswick, Maine. Our childhood unfolded on tree-lined streets where it seemed everyone knew my brother's name. Damien was the captain of the football team, the boy teachers praised for his charm even when his homework came in late. I was the one with perfect grades, the girl who ate lunch in the library. People remembered Damien's touchdowns, not my scholarships. Mom adored us both, but the pride in her voice always rang louder when she spoke of him. "Damien's a real leader," she'd say at parent-teacher conferences. And to me, she'd offer a soft smile and add, "Elise is reliable." It was never said with malice, but it still drew an invisible line between the standout and the background. That pattern followed us into adulthood. When property taxes came due on Mom's house near Main Street, I was the one calling the tax office, sorting out late fees, handling the paperwork. Yet on Thanksgiving, Damien would raise his glass and announce, "Don't worry, I took care of the taxes again this year." Mom's eyes would shine, and I would stay silent. He had honed this rhythm. Public praise to keep me compliant. Private whispers to paint me as weak. At family dinners, he'd lean toward Mom and murmur just loud enough for me to catch it, "Elise works too much. She forgets things. I worry about her stress." I'd chew my food slowly, pretending it didn't matter, pretending the words weren't carving away the edges of my place in the family. Now, with that voicemail still echoing in my head, I understood those years were rehearsals. The undermining I had let slide was building the foundation for this final, treacherous act. Damien had been writing the family script for decades, and I had played the role he assigned without protest. But sitting in my Portland apartment with the proof saved on my phone, I knew the script was changing. And this time, I wouldn't be speaking his lines. As I got older, it became easier to accept Damien's words as truth. They arrived disguised as concern, but inside they carried the sting of judgment. He'd glance at my grocery bags when I stopped by Mom's and shake his head. "You really need to spend that much on fresh produce?" Damien would ask. "Elise, half of it will go bad before you use it." When I reminded him most of it was for Mom, he'd sigh as if I were the one wasting money, not the one caring for her health. At first, I tried to ignore it, but soon the comments multiplied. He'd criticize the hours I dedicated to client consultations, hinting I didn't work enough to contribute. Then, in the next breath, claim I was too consumed by my career to pay attention to Mom. When it came time to adjust Margot's medications, he'd tell her I wasn't careful, that I missed the early signs. The bruises he left weren't on my skin, but I felt them in the ever-shrinking space I had left for my own decisions. I started double-checking every receipt, rereading every medical note, rehearsing explanations before I said anything. Then, the numbers began to speak louder than his words. One evening, while going through Mom's bank statements, I noticed recurring withdrawals labeled only as LLC. Damien's LLC. Small at first, $100 here, $200 there, but regular, like a siphon. I traced them back 6 months. Almost $5,000 in total. When I asked him about it, he laughed softly, as if I were confused. Elise, you're reading the statements wrong. It's reimbursement for expenses I covered. You wouldn't understand. It's complicated. He tilted his head in that patronizing, practiced way. And for a moment, I almost believed him. But the cold feeling in my stomach told me otherwise. I couldn't bring myself to show Mom. Not yet. The thought of shattering her trust in her son felt unbearable. Still, I knew silence made me his accomplice. I filed the statements in a folder and shoved it into my desk drawer. The paper's edge bit into my palm, a reminder that the truth was sharp and waiting, whether I wanted to hold it or not. After the voicemail, sleep wouldn't come. I lay on the couch until the sky began to lighten. The storm outside had ended, but the storm inside was just beginning. At 5:30 a.m., I got up, threw on a sweater, and moved quietly, as if I were trespassing in my own life. The folder with the bank statements was waiting in my desk. I added new pages, copies of utility bills, invoices, everything that linked Mom's finances to Damien's supposed reimbursements. I took photos of every page and uploaded them to an encrypted drive I had created years ago for work projects. This time, the stakes were higher than any client's business. Later, at Mom's house, I carefully navigated her home office while she still slept upstairs. In the closet stood legal documents, the deed to the Brunswick house, insurance policies, her modest retirement papers. I spread them on the desk, photographed them with my phone, then returned each sheet to its place. The action felt both protective and intrusive, but I reminded myself that inaction would be worse. Back in Portland that afternoon, I scoured the voicemail history, saving every one Damien had left me over the past year. The ones where he sounded charming, offering to fix everything, and the ones where his tone turned sharp and cold. Each file went into a folder simply labeled evidence. The final step was physical. I drove to Brunswick and rented a P.O. box at the post office, just 2 blocks from the church where Mom still sang in the choir. Now, all important medical bills and bank correspondence would come to me first. No more disappearing statements. No more excuses. Standing in the parking lot with the keys in my hand, I felt the morning air sharp in my lungs. Leaving at dawn wasn't escape. It was scouting the battlefield before Damien even knew the fight had begun. I drove back to Portland as the sun rose over the coast. Pale light spread across the water, and I understood that what had started with 27 seconds of betrayal was already rewriting every hour that followed. The folder of documents thickened with each passing day, but evidence without direction is just clutter. I needed someone who could turn it into something undeniable. That led me to a brick office building near Monument Square in Portland, where a senior elder law attorney named Nathan agreed to see me without an appointment. He listened carefully as I laid it all out, the voicemail, the withdrawals, the paper trail. When I handed him copies of the documents, his face grew serious, though his tone remained measured. He explained the concept of fiduciary responsibility in simple terms. Anyone managing a parent's finances is obligated to act in their best interest, and any deviation, especially for personal gain, could qualify as financial exploitation. Guardianship, he added, is only necessary if the court deems the parent incapacitated. But in our case, the danger wasn't incapacity. The danger was trust, misplaced on the wrong child. I left with a clear list of what to gather. Clear dates, matching bank statements, records with Damien's signatures, any testimony from people who noticed irregularities, all of it needed to be collected. That day, I started making calls. The home health aide who monitored Mom's medications remembered Damien insisting on paying cash for drugs that were already covered by insurance. She agreed to write a statement. The church treasurer, a quiet woman named Stephanie, mentioned she had questioned Damien about large donations drawn from Mom's account, but he brushed her off. She was willing to document those conversations. The final stop was the bank itself. At Bath Savings, I sat across from the branch manager who had known our family for years. When I mentioned Damien's LLC, his eyebrows rose. He opened the account history, confirmed the automatic withdrawals, and quietly printed the records with official seals. By evening, my dining table was covered in stacks of evidence. Each page another brick in the wall. Damien wouldn't be able to talk his way around this. For years, I had endured his attacks in silence, but now I had something stronger than anger. I had receipts, and they would speak for me when my own voice never seemed enough. I gathered the papers into the folder, closed its lid tight, and knew it was time to carry the truth directly to our mother. I suggested we spend the weekend together, just the two of us, under the pretense that Mom needed a change of scenery. Boothbay Harbor was quiet in early spring. The shops along the wharf weren't crowded yet, and the sea air smelled sharply of salt. We rented a small cottage with a view of the water. On the first day, I let Mom simply enjoy the moment. We made chowder together, walked along the piers, watched the gulls circle the lobster boats. I waited until the second evening, when the fire had burned down to embers and her hands rested calmly in her lap, before I pulled out my phone. "Mom," I said quietly, "you need to hear this." I pressed play. Damien's voice filled the room, smooth and confident. "Elise is just unreliable. She's unstable, careless. You need to transfer everything to me. She doesn't have the right state of mind for it." When the recording ended, the silence in the room was heavier than the tide outside. Mom blinked, pressing her lips together. "Finally," she said, "he means well. You know how he exaggerates when he's worried." I slid the folder across the table. Page after page, statements, signatures, the aide's notes, bank records. "This isn't exaggeration," I said. "This is what he's actually doing." She slowly flipped through the pages. Her shoulders were tense. At every date I pointed out, she searched my face for doubt, but I gave her none. The weight of the documents did what my words never could. Her face softened, but not toward me. It was sadness, not anger. "He's my son," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "I can't just cut him off." "I'm not asking you to disown him," I said. "I'm asking you to see the truth." She closed the folder, placing her palm on the cover as if it were fragile glass. After a long pause, she met my eyes. "I need time," she said. It wasn't the victory I had wanted, but it was a crack in the wall Damien had built. For the first time, Mom heard his words without his smile to mask them, and the silence that followed felt like the beginning of an accounting. I let the fire burn down even lower, still understanding that the next move wouldn't be mine alone. The invitation came through Mom, not Damien. And that alone was enough to speak volumes. He was hosting a brunch in Portland, choosing a waterfront restaurant where half the family could gather under the guise of a celebration. When I arrived, Damien was already seated next to Mom. His arm was draped casually over the back of her chair. His smile was so wide it seemed like he had nothing to hide. The first half hour was pure theater. He ordered for her, joked about my late nights and deadlines, and then shifted his voice to a serious tone. "I'm worried about Elise," he said, looking at Mom but addressing the table. "She's overwhelmed, a little paranoid lately. She thinks there's something wrong with Mom's accounts, but it's just stress." Mom didn't object. She sat with her coffee, barely nodding, her gaze lowered. For a moment, I felt the floor tilt beneath me. His words were smooth enough to erase the impression of the Boothbay weekend, convincing enough to make me doubt if the folder and the voicemail still mattered. But I came prepared. I opened my bag and pulled out the notarized letters from Bath Savings, each with an official seal. Then I placed on the table a sheet with time-stamped transactions, showing how Damien's withdrawals coincided with dates when he told Mom he was paying expenses on her behalf. I silently spread them across the table. Our cousins leaned in closer. Aunt Olivia adjusted her glasses to read. Mom looked stunned, torn between us. Damien's voice rose, a sharp crack in his facade. "This is manipulation. Elise has always been jealous. She doesn't understand what real responsibility is." His hand slapped the table, making the dishes rattle. No one rushed to comfort him. They just watched as the polished mask slipped right in front of the witnesses he himself had invited. I gathered the letters back into my bag. My heart beat steadily. For the first time, the room wasn't bending to his version of the story. It was bending to the truth, and the weight of the silence no longer belonged to me. The fallout from that brunch unfolded faster than I expected. Within a week, Bath Savings had frozen the transfers linked to Damien's LLC, citing suspicious activity and pending review. The numbers that had quietly slipped from Mom's account were now under a microscope. Every withdrawal became a glaring red flag. Nathan, the attorney, moved quickly. He filed a petition for an emergency audit, requesting a court order that would force Damien to produce documents showing how he had managed Mom's funds. "It's a first step," Nathan said, "but it will be enough to make him nervous." Meanwhile, the church treasurer, Stephanie, reached out. She said the board had decided to suspend the charitable fund Damien had proposed until they could verify where the donations originated. The words were carefully chosen, but I heard the truth beneath them. He could no longer be trusted. Damien didn't stay silent. He called late at night, always after midnight. His voice low and taut with rage. "You have no idea what you've started, Elise. You think you're helping her? You're ruining everything." I let him talk, let the venom pour through the line, while my phone continued recording on the table beside me. Every threat, every burst of anger became another file labeled evidence. I didn't respond to his accusations. Silence was stronger than any argument and shook him more than my words ever could. By the third call, his tone shifted from rage to pleading, but I kept recording and kept my distance. Mom felt the shift too, though she didn't speak of it openly. She lingered longer on the phone with me, asked careful questions, sought reassurance. The doubt that had kept her silent at the brunch was starting to crack, giving way to something heavier: realization. I stored the latest recordings with the letters from the bank. The folder grew heavier with each passing day, and I knew soon the weight would be too much for Damien to bear. The decision was made quietly, without any ceremony. Mom sat across from me in a conference room at a Brunswick law firm. Her hands were folded in her lap as the trustee read out the terms. Every asset, her house, her accounts, the modest pension she had guarded since my father's death, was placed into a living trust under the supervision of 2 independent attorneys. Damien's name was removed from the documents as if it had never been there. From that moment on, nothing could be moved without dual oversight. As the pen left her hand, Mom exhaled, like she had been holding her breath for years. She looked both older and lighter. Later, after we got home, she took me into her home office, silently opened a desk drawer, and pulled out a brass key on a small ring. She pressed it into my palm. "For the filing cabinet," she said quietly. "Everything important is in there. I want you to have this." The weight of that key cut deeper than any signature. It wasn't just access, it was trust. Finally given, without conditions. Damien showed up soon after, slamming the door so hard the picture frames trembled on the walls. When Mom told him about the trust, his face flushed red. His voice broke into a stream of accusations. He turned to our aunts and cousins for support, but no one moved. This time, their silence was different. It wasn't fear, it was refusal. He stormed out, the sound of the slammed door echoing down the hallway. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small next to him. I stood in Mom's office, the key warm in my hand, knowing the ground had permanently shifted. Now it wasn't just about protecting her anymore. It was about holding the map to a future life I would have to choose for myself. A few months later, the rhythm of my life was no longer dictated by constant defense. I signed a lease on a modest apartment near Casco Bay. The windows looked out over the harbor, where the tide rose and fell without asking anyone's permission. It was mine, paid for with my own earnings, untouchable by Damien and inaccessible through Mom's accounts. For the first time, the walls around me belonged only to me. I kept the brass key on a hook by the door, not because I needed it for access, but because it reminded me of the moment trust passed into my hands. Mom still lived in the old house. Her care now had clear boundaries. Our conversations grew softer. We talked less about Damien and more about her medications, her garden, the choir she had returned to. She no longer asked me to carry her burdens in silence. From the struggle, something unexpected grew. With the help of the church treasurer and some legal guidance, I organized a small community fund for caregivers to cover transportation costs, gaps in prescription payments, and respite hours for those tending to aging parents. The donations were modest, but each one carried a promise that others wouldn't feel as cornered as I once did. Sometimes, walking along the waterfront in the early morning, I remember that first dawn, copying documents in the dark. I understand now it wasn't an escape, it was a line drawn on a map. Each step that followed connected to the one before, forming a route no one else could claim. I didn't leave to run away. I left to draw the plan in ink so it could never be erased again.